Would you all please rise and join me for the pledge? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Welcome. This evening is Tuesday, October 10th, 2017. It's our regular meeting of Town Council due to the Columbus Day holiday yesterday. All members of council are present. Mr. Vagovic is not present this evening. We're going to move on to the consent calendar. Are there any comments, requests, objections to the consent calendar? All right, seeing none, absent objection, I'm going to pass the consent calendar. Moving on to communications, we have A through I. I'm going to ask that those communications be incorporated verbatim into the minutes. Moving on to public participation. Are there members of the public who wish to participate publicly at this time? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the first public participation. There are no appointments this evening. Moving on to action items. First is the Town Council Committee on Finance, Education, Health, and Public Safety. Mr. Fellows?
Yes. First, we'll do the Monroe Board of Education meeting, which was on October 2nd, 2017. Board Chair Lane introduced the 2017-2018 Student Board Representatives, Kevin Brown, William Santee, and Ryan Winkler. Consent agenda of past minutes and warrant S092717 was approved. Superintendent reviewed the October 1st, 2017 enrollment in the Monroe schools. Overall pre-K through 12 enrollment is down 42 students to 3,138. Superintendent Batista and Mrs. de Blasi reviewed the fiscal year 2019 budget timeline update. Superintendent Batista reported the following were appointed to the Superintendent Search Committee: Marie Blake from MEA, Jack Ceccolini from MASA, Krista DeLeo as Parents Council representative. Superintendent Batista reported that 5 teachers had applied for the MEA Teachers Early Retirement Incentive. The final walkthrough Stepney School project is scheduled for October 4th. Superintendent Batista reviewed the completed Board of Education belief statements and goals. The BOE to begin updating belief statements and goals for the next 5 years after the budget preparation. The board voted to accept the curriculum entitled Instructional Materials and Resources Proposals. The board voted to accept policies numbers 5113, 5113.2, 5114, 5115, and 5131. No new business was presented. Going on to the EMS Commission, met on 9/27. They expect to complete the RFP for the scheduled ambulance replacement in the next month. The Board of Health is meeting tonight, 10:10. They will be discussing the fact that the state of Connecticut Department of Public Health is adopting the FDA food code. This will result in changes to food establishment inspection criteria, such as hot and cold holding temperatures. The Health Department has sent a letter to all food establishments outlining all the changes, and during the transition period will be focusing on educating food service operators on the new state requirements. And then from the Fire Department, Mr. Davin, the Fire Service Feasibility Committee met for the bid opening. We will award the bid at the next meeting. All companies and the offices are busy with fire prevention because this is a safety month. And then from the police, there's a new public officer who started today at the Police Academy. We're up to 42 police. That's it for me.
Thank you, Ms. Lapellis. Moving on to action item B is the Town Council Committee on Planning and Zoning, Public Works, and Parks and Recreation. Mr. Reed is the chair of that. Mr. Reed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We don't have any updates on Park and Rec. I think, again, that's fairly idle. Things are just moving forward. However, we do have an update on how we can go forward with the Cell on Wheels, otherwise known as the AT&T COW. And I can give you a very quick update on that. We're not going to do a presentation tonight. As you know, as I think we all agree, that's not for subcommittee reports, but we do have to start formalizing this. Just to remind everybody, a couple of months ago, we did reach a consensus on council around giving AT&T and planning and zoning and our first selectman the opportunity to go back and forth and put together a proposal to replace the cow that sits at Fawn Hollow School. That's the AT&T Cell on Wheels that sits out there. It's a van with an antenna on it. The permanent site proposal, which we were looking for AT&T and planning and zoning to come up with, actually fire station. I know that there was some conversation around the Jockey Hollow campus looking out into the woods. There's actually a natural bowl there that they're looking to put the antenna in. So this would be behind the fire station building. It's a proposed 170-foot tall tower. The existing tower at the fire station will be removed, so there's a little bit of economy of scale there. The lease area would be about 100 by 100 feet. The initial term would be 5 years. Obviously, we'd have to have the town attorney and the town finance director and a few other people look at that. And it's a 7.5% rent increase each year for the 5-year extension term. So this would all be in the terms and conditions. Just some final things. I don't want to get too deep into their presentation. The lease would be included on a town council notice public meeting agenda. In other words, it follows our policy for looking at the 824 lease process between council and planning and zoning. Also, a siting council will hold a public hearing in Monroe. I believe AT&T does this quite frequently, and they know how to work within each town's process. So I think they would get back to us and explain that to us further. But they've got a number of processes they can take and to support it. But I think their proposal was sound. It's just a matter of whether or not or how we look through the lease proposal. And they've provided that as well, and I think I can maybe work with you to get that to everybody on council for next meeting.
Okay. Great, thank you very much.
Will the lease come to LNA first?
I believe so, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
In fact, I'll forward that to Mr. O'Rourke.
Okay. Anything further?
That's it.
All right, moving on to action item C, the Town Council Committee on Legislative and Administrative Matters. Mr. O'Rourke is the chair of that. Mr. O'Rourke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We discussed and moved the Greater Bridgeport Regional Interlocal Recycling Agreement to Town Council for further consideration. We also discussed the MS4, which is the stormwater management program that has to be implemented. This was specifically for the consultant contract. We voted to move that forward to Town Council for consideration, and also discussed the EMS building committee resolution, and we've tabled that for further review.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Rourke. Moving on to action item D is the Strategic Planning Committee. Mr. Kellogg is the chair of that committee. Mr. Kellogg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee has not met since our last council meeting. We have one item pending town attorney.
Great, thank you very much. Item E is the EMS Facility Work Group, soon to be replaced by the EMS Building Committee, which I understand was before LNA this evening with comments from our town attorney, but that subcommittee had not had the opportunity to fully review all the comments, so that was tabled, Mr. O'Rourke, until next meeting, correct?
Correct.
All right. And moving on to item F, First Selectmen's update. Mr. Pavlik's not present, and I did not receive an update from him this evening. If there are no further questions, then I'm going to move on to unfinished business. Chalk Hill updates. We do received and copied on an email from Mr. Nowacki to Mr. Vavrick and other department heads, just indicating that that Chalk Hill plan has been fully complied with, and there are but for the few outstanding items that need to be done in the next couple of years, such as the oil tank removal and some septic repairs and issues. That plan has been fully integrated, so that's a fairly dormant report until such time as the planning with Chalk Hill recommences. The fire study, any questions on Chalk Hill? I'm sorry. Discussion? Okay. None. Moving on to B, fire study status report. Mr. Kellogg, you've kind of been keeping us up to speed on this, if you would.
Thank you, yes. So the meeting is tomorrow afternoon to discuss the proposals that were submitted.
Great.
There's been no meeting since our last council meeting.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion on this matter?
What time is that meeting?
I believe it's 3 p.m., but I'll confirm that in a moment.
Thank you.
Any further discussion?
I'm sorry, 4 p.m.
4 p.m. Anything further?
No.
And that's, they've had their bid opening, so that's what they're going to talk about?
Right.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Moving on to new business. There's 3 matters this evening. First is the GBR Interlocal Recycling Agreement. Is there a motion, Mr. Pauls?
I make a motion to approve the Greater Bridgeport Regional Recycling Interlocal Agreement. Be it resolved that Stephen J. Fabric, First Selectman to the Town of Monroe, is hereby authorized and directed to execute and deliver any and all documents on behalf of the Town of Monroe regarding the Greater Bridgeport Regional Recycling Interlocal Agreement.
We have a motion by resolution by Ms. LaPellis. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Reed. For discussion, I'll turn the floor over to Mr. O'Rourke just for a brief update.
We had Chris Nowacki from head of DPW come in and present to us the interlocal recycle agreement. The big takeaway from that was that it mirrors or parallels exactly what we have for the solid waste management agreement. Given the similarities of the solid waste management agreement that we previously have agreed, and the GPRE interlocal recycling agreement paralleling that, we were in favor of moving this forward. I will point out, and I pointed it out to Chris, that it doesn't come up until July of next year, whereby there's, I guess, officially some action that would have had to been taken. And given the fact that we've gotten so much advance notice on this particular agreement versus the solid waste management agreement, I couldn't give Chris more kudos than I can think of, because that's the way to try to do it, work through it as far in advance as we can.
Great, thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. Mr. Reed, I know your subcommittee was working on this. Any further comment?
No, we mirror that. We echo what
Director of DPW.
Mr. O'Rourke's perception is on that and what was discussed in the subcommittee. I think just to put on record some of the things that do mirror it, it's very similar in our relationship with the Bridgeport Council, so the regional aspect of this is almost identical. Percentages, how it works, when we can back out, term limitations, term extent, conditions, it's pretty much the same thing. The only question I did have on this was in relation to when it does need to be signed. So are we looking to vote on this tonight, and is there any form of statute or statutory obligation for a public works director or our first selectman to sign the agreement within a certain amount of time of the vote on council? Can they sign it later in case anything comes up? Does our vote, is it end up in final, where we're not giving ourselves 6 to 7 months when this thing actually does need to be signed? Because we don't have to sign it as a town through our first selectman until then. So I'm just curious. I'm not saying we should.
Well, we're authorizing the motion is to authorize the selectman to sign the agreement that's been presented. So if there's a substantial material change to that agreement, I would venture to say that you would need council's reapproval. So
That works.
assuming nothing changes, that would be standard.
Do we know when he would intend to sign it?
I do not know.
Is that something we can put on a condition for our vote? I personally would not like to see him sign it for some time, because signing it authorizes us and obligates us for something that's a 7-month away term and condition.
Well, if that's our position, then I don't see any necessity to vote on it. We have a consensus this evening that, that we agree with the terms if we think there's any potential harm. But I would recommend that if that's a concern of the majority of council, then we not move forward formally with the resolution as proposed. But if we are comfortable with this, I see no reason not to move forward. But that's
Just throwing it out there to see if
No,
it's.
I appreciate that.
That sounds good.
And the current
Otherwise, we'd
agreement,
have to withdraw the motion,
Correct.
Yeah.
We could table the motion, correct?
we could, but
I'm good with it.
I don't see any reason to.
I personally see no reason to, since it mirrors the solid waste agreement, I see no reason to.
well, the key is to have the existing agreement transferred over to this regionalization agreement in a timely fashion, which we're well in advance of. So, I mean, there's no immediate need for any action, but that's why it's being brought up. In other words, I understand that July is the termination of the present agreement, and I guess December will be formalized for the GPRE version of it.
Right.
Yeah.
My recollection is, the only thing I'd say is my recollection of the solid waste agreement, as Mr. Rourke pointed out, although it was kind of, for put it kindly, thrown at us with a very short time period, I think it's important that the other towns know our position on this matter, and I think it would go a long way to show, our approval would go a long way to show the other towns that we're committed to this and may help them in formulating a greater regional opinion on this, but that would be.
I would echo that. When Mr. Reed was speaking, that was my thought. If we delayed doing this, what kind of a message would that send to this whole consortium? That would be a concern, perhaps. I'm comfortable with it tonight. We've seen it a lot.
So am I.
Any other discussion?
Good.
I want to thank, everybody good? I want to thank Mr. Nowacki, I want to thank you, Mr. Reed, for your work in your subcommittee, and Mr. O'Rourke, as always, your subcommittee always has the last view of everything, so I appreciate that. With that, I'll call for a vote on this. All those in favor? And against, motion carries 9-0. Moving on to item B is the Senior Center Wilton Cafe funding request. Mrs. LaFellis?
Yep, I make a motion to approve the modifications to the Senior Center Wilton Cafe. These modifications to retrofit the kitchen will cost between $12,000 and $15,000. And they're going to use the Lillian Wilton bequest to pay for these expenses, which was recently approved at a meeting of the Commission on Aging.
Motion by Ms. LaPellis to approve the expenditure of up to $15,000 for the Senior Center kitchen improvements. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hunsberger. For discussion purposes, just Ms. Yeager is present this evening, so I'll call on her to fill us in, but we do have some correspondence, and essentially, as council may recall, the Wilton estate graciously left a very large bequest to the town of Monroe to be specifically used for the senior center, social services, as well as parks and recreation. That was put into a special reserve account in the town of Monroe, and expenditures from that fund require approval of both the town council and the Board of Finance. So really, what we're voting on this evening is we are not the building department, and we are not planning and zoning, and we're not any other department, but we're authorizing the expenditure of the funds, which is a checks and balance measure that was put in place to ensure that the town was on board with spending funds for these specific purposes. So that's what the motion is really for this evening. Since the costs are not to $12,000 to $15,000, I think it's appropriate. The motion is a not to exceed $15,000 number. My understanding from my conversations with Mr. Manjos is that this is going to be, as soon as possible, if not already, on a Board of Finance agenda for their approval as well. So with that, Ms. Yeager, if you have anything to add, I know we have enough information, but if you want to add anything, the floor is yours.
I mean, it was not our choice originally to redo that kitchen in its location. We wanted to wait till we put the addition on, but we didn't want to wait 2 years for another kitchen, so when we do the addition, there won't be a kitchen in the new addition.
Okay.
We'll make these improvements now and we'll be done with it.
And I assume that the Commission on Aging has approved this plan moving forward?
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion, Mr. Hunsberg?
I was present during the presentation as the liaison to the center, and I must say that the effort that has been put into the presentation, or the preparation of this estimate, I was very impressed that the staff there did a great job in going through it and paring it down to what was essential.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Ms. Martin, sure.
Ms. Yeager, are you, if we do this not to exceed 15, you and your commission are comfortable with that?
Yes, I mean, I hopefully anticipate that there won't be any hidden costs, but
Right.
once we start picking it out and building a new wall, we don't know. So I think we should be fine with that.
Okay, I'm good.
Anybody else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One question that I had, Ms. Yeager, is we have had a lot of discussion about the, call them the leftover equipment for whatever it was that exists at Chalk Hill in the kitchen. Was that ever
Yes.
considered?
We did go up there, measure it, it's way too big for our facility.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. That's the answer I wanted to hear.
And not
Anybody-
even any of the work tables or anything, none of
No,
that?
the way they were constructed wouldn't fit in the confines of our, we have a very small kitchen, so.
Okay. Yeah.
Anybody else? All right, and again, just to be clear, we're voting on the expenditure of funds, authorizing the expenditure of funds and nothing more. So with that, and the other thing I would mention, and Ms. Yeager, let's just talk about it now. I don't want to get into too much detail about the vendor. My understanding is that there was a food vendor that was providing food service in that location previously.
Yes,
And I assume that there was or is an agreement that corresponds with that food vendor, between the town and that food vendor?
yes, there was a temporary,
Okay, so my expectation, I think everybody shares and echoes, the expectation is that when the kitchen is retrofitted, should there be a negotiation with any third-party food vendor, we would expect that that contract be presented through the Selectman's office to council for its consideration. Thank you. All right. Seeing any further discussion? All right, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And against, that motion carries 9-0. Thank you very much. And our last item this evening is the MS4 General Stormwater Management Plan. Mr. Bellis?
I make a motion to approve PO 117-12142-01 regarding the consulting services for the development of a municipal stormwater management plan and completion of an associated 2017 MS4 registration request for amendment number 1.
Motion by Mr. Pellis, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rooney, sorry. For discussion, I'll just ask Mr. O'Rourke to update us since his subcommittee did touch on
Sure.
this.
We had land use director, Scott Chasline, if I have that correct. He came in and gave us a presentation, and this is the stormwater management mandate by the state that's being implemented throughout all the towns and the cities in the state. And this small piece of it is just the very beginning of it. It's a consultancy fee. There's much more for this to come. He showed us binders that were several inches thick that we were more than happy. If we wanted to look at them, we were more than welcome to do so. I think this is one of those areas where we just have to rely on the experts to manage and navigate our way through this process.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. Any further discussion? I just want to thank Mr. Schatzline in this instance. He did bring this to our attention quite early in the process, knowing the mandate was coming down, and was able to secure Ty and Bond, who has a relationship with the town of Monroe, is also vetted through, I think it's a QPS type process by
Ty and Bond.
the state of
TIGNG.
So he did go through that process and did, get out ahead of this mandate, unfortunate mandate that did come down, and was requiring the town to spend money on this a little bit sooner than expected. But thank you for your work, Mr. O'Rourke, again on this and your subcommittee.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Martin?
I would just add, one of the things that Mr. Chastain said to us was that, according to this group that we've worked with before, we might be looking at $100,000 a year for the next 5 years. So we should file that one away and remember it.
You're regarding the new mandate that
Yes,
came down.
yes.
Okay. Anything further?
I think he was also mentioning that, previous mandates for how long that took to implement fully. That just took years and years and years. So the timeline with regards to maybe that exposure to that amount of money, probably still in a jail for him.
Right. All right. Anything further? All right. Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And against, that motion carries 9-0. That concludes our business for this evening. We have second public participation. Would anybody like to speak in second public participation? All right, seeing none, I'll close second public participation. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Pellis, second by Mr. Rooney. All those in favor? Motion carries 9-0. Thank you very much. Good evening.